They call it eternal ice, a veil of white that cloaks the southernmost edge of our world, where no living witness has ever returned to tell what truly lies beneath. Yet in 1513, an Ottoman map etched on gazelle skin, the Piri Reis Map, traced a startlingly precise coastline, free of ice, exactly where modern Antarctica now sleeps beneath miles of frozen silence. How could an admiral from the 16th century depict a land untouched by the sun for over 10,000 years? Historians brushed it off, called it coincidence. But in 1960, a classified report by the U.S. Air Force admitted the map's contours matched seismic surveys of the subglacial bedrock, a terrain that had once been open, vibrant, and then vanished. Could it be that beneath the crushing ice lies the buried memory of a civilization long lost, not to war or conquest, but to time itself? This is not a claim. It's an invitation, a slow descent through ancient maps, forbidden symbols, and disputed science, to trace the outlines of a world erased some 14,000 years ago. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Right now, I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. It was discovered in 1929, tucked away in the archives of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, sketched in ink on gazelle skin. At first glance, it was just another aged nautical chart, one among many drawn by Ottoman cartographers. But when scholars unrolled it under careful light, something didn't add up. There, along the southernmost edge of the parchment, was a landmass that defied historical logic. A detailed depiction of the northern coastline of Antarctica, drawn centuries before the continent was officially discovered, and most astonishingly, showing it free of ice. The Piri Reis Map, named after the Ottoman admiral who compiled it, has haunted historians ever since. Dated to 1513, the map openly references source materials from earlier civilizations, including ancient Greek charts and maps from the time of Alexander. But none of those classical sources, to our knowledge, had any concept of a landmass far beyond the Cape of Good Hope. Yet there it was, Antarctica, with bays, inlets, and mountain ranges laid out in such precision that modern cartographers, comparing it to seismic radar surveys beneath the Antarctic ice, have expressed open disbelief. How could a map drawn during the Age of Sail contain accurate geographical details of a continent buried under more than a mile of ice for the past 12,000 years? This isn't fringe speculation. Charles Hapgood, a professor of history at Keene State College, proposed a radical theory in the 1950s to explain this anomaly. In his book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, Hapgood argued that ancient mariners, far more advanced than we give them credit for, mapped the Earth in deep antiquity. He suggested that the Piri Reis Map and others like it were not products of Renaissance guesswork, but copies of copies, handed down from a lost civilization with advanced geographical knowledge. His idea caught the attention of none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote a preface to Hapgood's book, stating that his ideas are of great importance for everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface. Still, academia scoffed. The notion of a high civilization capable of mapping the planet 12,000 years ago clashed violently with the established narrative. that humans at the end of the last ice age were scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, barely past the cusp of nomadism. The map was dismissed, explained away as coincidence or misinterpretation. But coincidence has a habit of accumulating. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531, the Boache map of 1737, the Mercator maps, all showed something impossible. Antarctica without ice, complete with rivers and mountain ranges that were only confirmed by 20th century seismic scans. How could Renaissance and Enlightenment mapmakers, without satellites or even an understanding of the southern hemisphere, chart what lay beneath the ice? Skeptics argue that these maps might have been speculative, but speculation cannot explain geographic accuracy that matches modern data gathered using ground-penetrating radar. Here, the ice becomes less of a metaphor and more of a veil, one that has sealed away a chapter of history we were never meant to read. Because if Antarctica was ice-free when those ancient source maps were made, it means that someone saw it, stood on its shores, charted its coasts, and knew its contours before the continent froze over, which geological and climatological studies suggest occurred around 10,000 BCE. This time frame aligns with the abrupt end of the Younger Dryas, a climatic event marked by rapid global warming and massive sea level rise. Theories abound. Some suggest a comet impact, others point to solar flares, crustal displacement, or massive glacial meltwater release disrupting ocean currents. Whatever happened, it changed the world forever. Species vanished. Sea levels rose by over 400 feet. Coastal regions were swallowed whole. And if a civilization had existed along those coasts, say, in a then temperate Antarctica, it would have been buried under snow, time, and myth. What if the Piri Reis Map is not a historical aberration, but a fingerprint, one of the few surviving traces of an ancient knowledge system now lost beneath layers of both literal and scholarly ice? The map itself offers no narrative, no names of cities, no myths, no chronicles, just lines. But lines can be powerful. They suggest intent, movement, presence. And the deeper you follow those lines, the more they lead elsewhere. Not just to Antarctica, but to a network of forgotten geographies. The map links the Amazon basin with Africa, shows details of the Andes Mountains unknown to Europeans at the time, and even includes what some interpret as submerged land in the Atlantic, perhaps a memory of lands now lost. But that's the nature of ancient cartography. It is part geometry, part cosmology, part inheritance. A palimpsest, built on the dreams and ruins of those who came before. Why would a 16th century admiral include a depiction of an ice-free Antarctica on a map meant for naval navigation? He claimed he compiled it from older charts. So the real question becomes, who drew those originals? Who were these mapmakers with global reach, precision instruments, and a view of Earth as a unified whole? Here the possibilities grow colder and darker. Because if Antarctica was once inhabited, and that civilization reached the level of mapping coastlines with accuracy we only regained in the 20th century, what else did they know? What else did they leave behind? And why did it vanish so completely, save for whispers in animal skin, locked in a palace archive for 4 centuries? We have been taught to believe history is a linear ascent, from primitive to complex, from ignorance to enlightenment. But the Piri Reis Map suggests another shape entirely, a cycle, a wave, civilizations rising and falling in long-forgotten epochs, some lost not to decay, but to cataclysm. And so we must ask, if a civilization once mapped Antarctica, what did they leave buried beneath its ice? In 2018, a NASA-funded study sent ripples through the scientific world when it confirmed something long suspected but never publicly embraced. Beneath the miles-thick Antarctic ice sheet, there lies a vast and active geothermal system, a heat source. A pulse, steady and persistent, radiating upward from Earth's crust. This wasn't new. Scientists had theorized subglacial volcanic activity for years, but this time it was mapped in exquisite detail. The West Antarctic Rift System, a region riddled with geothermal hotspots, underground lakes, and rivers flowing beneath the ice like veins beneath pale skin. It's easy to forget, when looking at satellite images of that endless white expanse, that Antarctica is not simply a frozen desert. It is a geological paradox. It is the coldest place on Earth, and yet its underbelly is warm, almost alive. The same warmth that powers Iceland's geysers and Yellowstone's calderas exists here too, only hidden, smothered by eons of glaciation. Why does that matter? Because warmth means water. And water, liquid, flowing, mobile, is the foundation of life. Beneath Antarctica's ice, scientists have discovered more than 400 subglacial lakes, including Lake Vostok, sealed off from the surface for as much as 15 million years. The lake stretches over 250 kilometers in length, shielded beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. When Russian scientists drilled into it in 2012, what they found was a closed biosphere, a pocket of ancient Earth untouched by modern contamination. The implications were staggering. Ecosystems that evolved in total isolation, potentially harboring organisms unknown to science, biological relics from an earlier Earth. But there is another layer to this discovery. In 2006, radar mapping missions by NASA's Ice Bridge program detected what appeared to be remnants of ancient riverbeds and drainage channels, not just around the lakes, but spread across the bedrock of Antarctica. These weren't random flows. They followed patterns, courses, deltas. They spoke of a time when Antarctica was not frozen, but lush, perhaps even forested. And this isn't just a fantasy of climate revisionists. In 2012, researchers from Ohio State University revealed a trove of fossilized pollen grains retrieved from beneath the Ross Ice Shelf. Their conclusion? Around 12 to 14 million years ago, during the mid-Miocene period, the Antarctic coast hosted tundra vegetation. Trees, mosses, possibly even flowering plants. The pollen didn't blow in from elsewhere. It was local. But let's go even closer to the time that concerns us. 12,000 years ago, at the end of the Pleistocene. This is the epoch we must examine most carefully, because something happened then. Something sudden, something global. The Younger Dryas. Around 12 by 900 years ago, Earth plunged into a sudden, sharp, cold snap that lasted over a millennium, interrupting the gradual warming after the last ice age. This period ended just as abruptly, around 11,600 years ago, with a rapid warming event that saw global temperatures soar in a matter of decades. Ice sheets collapsed. Sea levels rose at an unimaginable pace. The very geography of the planet was reshaped in human time. If Antarctica had supported life, or even civilization prior to this event, then this would have been its extinction moment. So we must ask, what evidence exists of Antarctica as habitable land at that time? There is a curious convergence of myth and geology. Ancient Mesopotamian texts speak of a great flood. So do the Hindu Vedas, the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the Norse Edda, and dozens of indigenous oral histories across 5 continents. Always the same story. an advanced people destroyed by rising waters, by fire from the sky, by a sudden darkness. Skeptics dismiss these as metaphors, but increasingly, geologists and climatologists are taking a second look. In 2015, scientists studying ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica found markers, platinum anomalies, nanodiamonds, and soot layers that are consistent with a cosmic impact event. A comet, perhaps, or a series of air bursts like the Tunguska event. This supports the so-called Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. If true, it could explain not only the sudden climatic shifts, but also the widespread legends of Cataclysm. What if that impact didn't just melt glaciers and darken skies, but shifted the planet's crust? Enter Charles Hapgood again, with his now infamous theory of crustal displacement. Unlike plate tectonics, which moves land slowly over millions of years, Hapgood proposed that the Earth's crust could shift rapidly as a whole, like the skin of an orange sliding over its flesh. He believed that massive ice buildup at the poles could cause imbalance, prompting the entire outer shell of the planet to slip. In this theory, Antarctica was once situated in a temperate zone, until it was displaced to the South Pole in a single, catastrophic event. Einstein again offered cautious support, calling the theory original, of great simplicity, and if it continues to prove itself, of great importance to everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface. Modern geology rejects Hapgood's displacement model in favor of gradual tectonic movement. But they don't reject the data he used, only his interpretation. The ice cores are real, the sudden climate shifts are real, the rapid extinction events, the lost shorelines, the submerged continental shelves, they're all real. So the question becomes, if Antarctica once lay in a habitable zone, could it have supported human life? Not primitive life, not nomads huddled in caves, but people with ships, with a cosmology, with a cartographic tradition capable of recording coastlines and preserving them through millennia. And here's where things turn unsettling. Because in 2020, scientists using remote sensing technologies detected what they described as anomalous rectilinear structures beneath the ice near Wilkes Land, a 300-mile-wide mass anomaly in the crust. Was it a meteor impact, or the buried remains of something else? The data is inconclusive. The papers are cautious, but the whispers grow louder. Why are military satellites mapping the Antarctic bedrock with such precision? Why have nations carved out territorial claims in a place supposedly devoid of resources or population? Why, in a continent where mining and drilling are banned, do some of the world's most powerful countries maintain year-round research stations with classified segments? And why still do we avoid the one question no one dares to ask outright? If there is warmth beneath the ice, if there were rivers and forests and time, who was there to walk in them? In the highlands of southeastern Turkey, atop a wind-swept ridge that stares across the Euphrates Valley, lies a site that should not exist, Gobekli Tepe. Potbelly Hill, in Turkish, was first excavated in the mid-1990s by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who soon realized he had stumbled upon the oldest known megalithic complex on Earth. 12,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by 7,000 years. Built when humanity, according to mainstream timelines, was still just emerging from the Paleolithic. No agriculture, no metal tools, no cities. And yet, there it stood. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, arranged in concentric circles, carved with animals, serpents, birds, and abstract humanoid forms. They had been deliberately buried, entombed in layers of backfill, as if the builders had chosen to hide their creation from time itself. What kind of people could have erected these monuments in 10,000 BCE, using nothing but primitive tools and bare hands? There were no signs of permanent dwellings nearby, no evidence of sustained settlement. The site seemed to have been constructed solely for ritual or cosmological purposes. But how could a society organize such labor, such abstract thought, such architectural finesse, without the structural scaffolding of agriculture, cities, and written language? It was a question that gnawed at the edge of historical certainty. One of the carvings, known as Pillar 43, or the Vulture Stone, depicts a strange alignment of symbols. For years it was dismissed as animal art, shamanic or totemic in nature. But in 2017, researchers at the University of Edinburgh applied astronomical software to simulate the sky over Gobekli Tepe in the millennia around its construction. They found that the arrangement of the animals matched the constellations as they would have appeared in the sky around 10,950 BCE, corresponding remarkably with the onset of the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. In other words, the stone carvings may not be animals at all, but a star map, a celestial warning, a record of the sky at the moment the world changed. This was not a fluke. Across the ancient world, from the stone spheres of Costa Rica to the petroglyphs of the Sahara, there appears a recurring theme: sky knowledge, celestial alignments encoded in temples, pyramids, and monuments, long before the tools to measure or model them should have existed. The builders of Gobekli Tepe were not mindless primitives. They were astronomers, mythmakers, engineers of memory, and perhaps survivors. If a catastrophic event had swept across the globe around 12,000 years ago, erasing coastlines, extinguishing species, and burying civilizations beneath sediment and ice, then Gobekli Tepe may represent something even more profound than a religious site. It could be a memory anchor, a rebirth, the first attempt of a remnant people to re-establish order in a disordered world. What does this have to do with Antarctica? The timeline. Gobekli Tepe was built just as the Younger Dryas ended, just as the Earth warmed rapidly, just as sea levels began to rise with fury, and just as, hypothetically, any pre-existing civilization at lower elevations, or in now frozen regions, would have been wiped from the face of the earth. If we look at Gobekli Tepe not as the beginning of civilization, but as a restart, the pieces begin to shift. The leap from cave dwellers to megalithic architects no longer seems impossible if they were inheriting fragments of a deeper tradition, one carried through oral memory, through stone, through encoded symbols whose meanings outlast the languages that bore them. And here's where the symbols start to speak. Many of the carvings at Gobekli Tepe share motifs with distant cultures. The double-headed eagle of Mesopotamia, the curled serpent of Mesoamerica, the winged disk of Egypt. These symbols appear across continents, in civilizations separated by thousands of years and oceans of space. Coincidence, convergent evolution, or fragments of a common ancestral knowledge dispersed and distorted by time and trauma? Some researchers point to the motif of the Watcher, a bird-headed figure or eye-shaped glyph present in Sumerian, Egyptian, and even South American art. A symbol often associated with sky gods, with vigilance, with remembrance. The eye reappears again and again. The eye of Horus, the all-seeing eye, the ever-watchful entities of ancient myth. Were these beings meant to be gods, or ancestors, or simply those who saw what others could not? Those who remembered a world before the deluge? Now turn your gaze back south. Imagine, for a moment, a civilization at the southern tip of the world. A civilization living not in ice, but in a verdant Antarctica, prior to its burial. Imagine their cities, their observatories, their markers aligned to stars no longer visible from their current latitude. Imagine their desperate exodus as the cold came, as the seas rose, as the earth shifted beneath their feet. Where would they go? North, to the equator, to fertile regions, to highlands untouched by floodwaters, to places where they could rebuild, even if only symbolically, even if only to remember, even if only to tell those who came after that they had once existed. Is it so far-fetched to imagine that such a diaspora might have seeded fragments of its knowledge across the world? That the sky myths of the Dogon people in Mali, who knew of Sirius B before modern telescopes, could be an echo? That the global obsession with pyramids, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, Cambodian, could be a cultural fossil? That the enigmatic precision of Tiwanaku's stonework in Bolivia, or the unexplained vitrification of Scottish hill forts, or the matching megaliths across the globe are not isolated anomalies, but scattered chapters of a lost origin story? It is tempting to dismiss such thoughts as romanticism, as pseudo-history. But the stones do not lie. And when they look to the sky, we are obligated to look with them. Because Göbekli Tepe forces us to confront a fundamental question. How could such sophistication emerge in a vacuum? And if it did not emerge, but re-emerged, then from what abyss of memory was it drawn? High in the Peruvian Andes, just beyond the bustling tourist paths of Machu Picchu, lies a stone, seemingly simple, unassuming, yet carved with a precision that unsettles even seasoned archaeologists. It is known as the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun. The Inca believed it to be an astronomical device, a point where the sun could be symbolically tied to prevent its disappearance during the long Andean winters. But what truly captivates those who study it isn't the folklore. It's the fact that it functions with uncanny celestial precision. On the equinoxes, the shadow cast by the central pillar disappears almost entirely. The device tracks solstices and zenith points with a grace that rivals modern solar observatories. And yet, it was built without metal tools, without written language, without the supposed scaffolding of scientific development. How? The Inca themselves claimed they did not build it. They inherited it. The same is said of Pumapunku in Bolivia, where stone blocks weighing more than 100 tons were shaped with such precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate them. The H-blocks interlock like puzzle pieces with millimeter-perfect cuts, right angles, and polished surfaces. Crafted from andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. No written records explain how. No myth claims ownership. The builders, it seems, had vanished. These sites are not alone. Around the globe, from Giza to Baalbek, from Angkor to Easter Island, there exist monuments that appear to measure not merely terrestrial cycles, but celestial harmonics. They mark solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills, and even precessional shifts, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over a 26,000-year cycle. Why would prehistoric societies care about such long spans of time? And more urgently, how would they even perceive them? The answer may lie in the concept of the world age, Across cultures, myths speak of time not as linear, but cyclical, divided into great epochs. The Greeks had their golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages. The Hindus speak of yugas, spans of tens of thousands of years, each marking a moral and physical decline. The Maya developed the long count calendar, counting back to a creation date in 3114 BCE and stretching forward in cycles that span millennia. None of these systems were arbitrary. They were rooted in sky observation, specifically in the movements of stars and constellations across the horizon over centuries. The precession of the equinoxes, for instance, shifts the backdrop of the spring equinox through the 12 signs of the zodiac over 25,920 years. It is a cycle almost imperceptible to a single lifetime, but traceable across generations of careful watchers. Who had the patience to track such a cycle? One possibility is this: they didn't need to track it, they inherited it. Encoded knowledge passed from an earlier time. Perhaps not perfectly understood, but revered. Rebuilt. Repositioned. Preserved. The Great Pyramid of Giza, aligned almost perfectly to true north, shows wear patterns suggesting it was already ancient by the time of the earliest known dynasties. Its internal passages align with the stars of Orion's belt and Sirius, as they would have appeared not in 2500 BCE, but around 10,500 BCE. A date that keeps surfacing, again and again. Robert Bauval, in his Orion correlation theory, argued that the layout of the Giza pyramids mirrors Orion's belt, only as it appeared over 12,000 years ago. This wasn't a random fit. The angles, proportions, and orientations matched with eerie accuracy. If true, then the pyramids were not merely tombs or temples, but markers, time capsules, stone clocks pointing not forward, but backward, reminders of a sky that once was. Why would a civilization go to such lengths to encode these alignments? Perhaps because the stars were not just lights. They were memory, markers of when and where, a language older than writing, spoken through architecture, immune to fire and flood. And here, the pieces begin to coalesce. If an advanced seafaring culture once existed, capable of global navigation, of astronomical alignment, of cyclopean architecture, they may have encoded their timekeeping into monuments, not to predict the future, but to remember the past. The precession of the equinoxes is slow, but measurable. Every 72 years, the stars shift 1 degree. If you know the rate and you know the position, you can work backward to when a structure was aligned. It's like discovering a timestamp carved into the heavens. What if Antarctica once housed such monuments, structures now buried beneath the ice, oriented to a sky we can no longer see from its current position? What if radar scans or gravitational anomalies are not just detecting rock, but memory? In 2002, a British-American team detected a massive circular formation beneath the ice near Lake Vostok, roughly 400 kilometers in diameter. Official explanations suggest it's a geological uplift, but others point to its shape, its symmetry, its isolation, and ask whether it could be artificial. A calendar? A city? A marker? The ice, for now, holds its secrets. But elsewhere, the story continues. At Angkor Wat, the temples form a pattern that mimics the constellation Draco as it appeared in 10,500 BCE. At Teotihuacan, the layout echoes the same celestial geometry as Giza. At Easter Island, the Moai face the horizon, watching, not the sea, but the sky. These are not coincidences. They are coordinates. Cultural longitudes aligned to a vanished time. And time itself becomes the key. because the more we understand these ancient clocks, the more we see they all point to one epoch, a time before the great flood myths, before the Younger Dryas ended, before recorded history began. They point over and over to 12,000 years ago, to the end of something, or perhaps the beginning of what came next. There is a curious convergence in the world's oldest stories. Again and again, across continents and civilizations, we find the tale of a great flood. Not a seasonal monsoon or a localized inundation, but a deluge of such force and fury that it drowns mountains, swallows cities, and resets the world. The names vary: Utnapishtim in Mesopotamia, Deucalion in Greece, Manu in India, Nu in Polynesia, Coxcox among the Aztecs, Nu in Islam, Noah in the Bible. But the shape of the story remains: a chosen survivor, a divine warning, the building of an ark, and a world washed clean. For centuries, scholars dismissed these as mythic archetypes, universal metaphors for renewal, fear of nature, or psychological rebirth. But what if they're more than metaphor? Geologists now speak with a different tone. In 1997, marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman published compelling evidence that the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake, until around 5600 BCE, when rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosporus Strait and flooded the basin in a cataclysmic event. Seawater poured in at an estimated 200 times the volume of Niagara Falls, raising the lake level hundreds of feet in a matter of weeks. Coastal villages would have vanished almost overnight, and survivors, if there were any, would have remembered. But 5600 BCE is still too recent for our story. We must go deeper. Back to the end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,600 years ago, when the last ice age collapsed and sea levels rose by more than 400 feet worldwide. This is not a theory, it's a geologic fact. Between 14,000 and 8,000 years ago, Earth's glaciers retreated with astonishing speed. The North American Laurentide ice sheet alone shed enough water to reshape the coastlines of every continent. Vast regions of what is now dry land were once part of the ocean floor, and vice versa. The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, the Doggerland land bridge between Britain and Europe, the Beringia Plain linking Siberia and Alaska, all were inundated, erased from memory, from maps, from history. And with them, perhaps, were civilizations. This is where Graham Hancock, author of Underworld and Magicians of the Gods, enters the conversation. A controversial figure, Hancock has spent decades exploring submerged ruins and challenging orthodox timelines. He argues that advanced cultures, predecessors to known civilizations, may have existed during the Ice Age and been obliterated in the meltwater pulse events. Critics call him a pseudo-scientist, but his evidence isn't easily dismissed. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, sonar scans in 2001 revealed submerged structures 130 feet below the Arabian Sea. Divers retrieved artifacts, stone anchors, pottery shards, architectural blocks, later dated to between 7,000 and 9,000 years old. Far older than the city of Dwarka in Hindu texts, yet eerily aligned with its mythic location. Indian authorities, initially skeptical, acknowledged the significance. But research stalled, and interest waned. Further east, off the coast of Japan, lies Yonaguni, an underwater rock formation that, at first glance, appears natural. But closer inspection reveals massive steps, platforms, and what looks like a towering ziggurat carved from bedrock. The site lies 100 feet below the surface. Geologist Masaki Kimura has argued for decades that it's man-made, possibly over 10,000 years old. Detractors insist it's natural erosion. yet the debate continues. Unresolved. Why the resistance? Because to accept these dates is to unravel the foundation of modern archaeology. If complex construction existed 10,000 years ago, beneath oceans, beneath glaciers, it implies a lost chapter of human history. Not primitive, not mythic, but real. And the most haunting implication of all, they saw it coming. Because flood myths aren't just stories of water, they're warnings. In Sumerian texts, the gods argue before unleashing the deluge. In the Popol Vuh, the gods destroy their flawed creation. In Plato's Timaeus, Atlantis falls in a single day and night of misfortune. These stories speak of judgment, but they also speak of memory. Perhaps the survivors encoded their trauma not in writing, but in narrative. In myth, because stories travel further than stone. It's here we encounter another disturbing thread. The flood myths are often paired with fire. Fire from the sky, the comet, the star that burned. In Zoroastrian, Norse, Mayan, and Aboriginal tales, the end of the age comes with heat, not just water. Modern science echoes this. Meltwater pulses may have been triggered not only by solar forcing, but by impact events, comets or fragments that struck ice sheets, vaporizing glaciers, disrupting climate systems, sending shockwaves across continents. The Clovis culture in North America, once thought to be the earliest evidence of human habitation, disappears from the archaeological record around 12,800 years ago. Coincidence? Or part of the same catastrophe? What would it mean if Atlantis was not a moral fable, but a distorted echo of a real place? A civilization that flourished before the floodwaters came, now buried, not under legend, but under sediment and sea? And what if the memories of that place were preserved, not as fact, but as story? Our ancestors told tales of gods and giants, of sky fires and floods, but maybe they were just telling us about themselves, about what they endured, about what they lost. And perhaps the reason we keep finding remnants, maps that shouldn't exist, monuments that defy logic, myths that repeat across the globe, is because they were trying to tell us something. Not just who they were, but what had happened, and what might happen again. So we return to the ice, to Antarctica, to the place that holds no myths, but perhaps all the memory. If the flood swallowed the world, what lies in the drowned silence below? It begins with a triangle. Draw a line from the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt to the Nazca Lines in Peru. Then extend it southeast to Easter Island. Complete the loop back to Giza, and you have what many call the Earth's sacred triangle. Not in the mystical sense, but in something disturbingly precise, because the distances, angles, and alignments among these sites aren't vague approximations. They are mathematically stunning. All three lie near the same great circle path, each connected by geodesic lines that reflect a deep knowledge of Earth's curvature. Is this coincidence, statistical noise, or intentional geometry? At Giza, the Great Pyramid's position encodes the dimensions of the Earth. Its perimeter is a scale model of the equator, its height corresponds to polar radius, and its orientation to true north is so precise it deviates by less than 0.05 degrees. At Nazca, the massive geoglyphs, straight lines stretching for miles, perfect trapezoids, spirals, and animal forms, were only fully appreciated from the air, and still baffle engineers with their scale and clarity. And on Easter Island, the Moai statues, monolithic stone heads with torsos buried underground, face inland as if watching something long vanished, while the island itself is filled with petroglyphs astronomical calendars, and extinct script. They each emerged from separate cultures at different times, or so we're told. But the similarities are too abundant. The geometric logic embedded in their layout, the orientation to solstices, equinoxes, and star alignments all echo a shared template, a plan, a memory. And when we add more sites, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan, the Oracle of Delphi in Greece, and Tiwanaku in Bolivia, another pattern begins to form. Not of randomness, but resonance. Enter the work of engineer and researcher Evan T. Sanderson, who identified 12 regions across the globe, symmetrical zones where bizarre phenomena cluster. These include the Bermuda Triangle and its lesser-known twin, the Dragon's Triangle off the coast of Japan. They form a global pattern of icosahedral symmetry. Later, Russian scientists Goncharov, Makarov, and Morozov expanded the model into what they called the Earth Grid, a matrix of energy points and geophysical anomalies where many ancient sites are curiously clustered. Skeptics scoff. But GPS doesn't lie. The coordinates are real. The alignments are measurable. Why then did ancient builders, allegedly without any knowledge of global geography, erect structures on mathematically meaningful points? How could civilizations with no contact and no knowledge of the globe's shape encode the same astronomical truths in stone? One explanation is that they didn't discover this independently. They inherited it. This possibility becomes more plausible when we examine the structures themselves, not just their placement, but their materials and design. The Great Pyramid is not simply a pile of limestone. Its core is composed of 2.3 million blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, arranged with joints so fine a razor blade can't fit between them. The mortar used, still unreplicated today, has held the structure through earthquakes, erosion, and time. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the megalithic walls are composed of multi-ton stones cut with irregular yet interlocking shapes, fitted together like a jigsaw. No mortar, no gaps. Not even modern laser cutters could achieve this level of precision on uneven stone. The same style appears in distant Japan and the island of Malta. Even more curious is the resonance, literally. Many of these ancient chambers are tuned to specific acoustic frequencies. The King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid amplifies and sustains low-frequency sound. The Hypogeum in Malta, an underground temple carved from limestone, produces powerful acoustic effects at precisely 111 Hz, a tone that stimulates theta brainwaves in humans. At Chavin de Huantar in Peru, flutes and conch shells resonate through stone corridors like a designed sonic system. Who would tune a temple? Who would build with sound in mind? Only those who understood vibration, not as metaphor, but as fundamental principle. In ancient Hindu cosmology, the universe begins with sound, Om, the primal frequency. Modern physics echoes this notion, describing a universe made of vibrating strings, resonant particles, harmonic fields. Sound, it seems, is not just symbolic. It's structural. Did the ancients know this? If so, how? We come now to the possibility most feared by mainstream academia, that all these scattered feats of engineering, all these alignments and resonances derive from a single progenitor civilization, one that understood geometry not as abstraction, but as sacred law, one that saw Earth as a living harmonic body and built upon it accordingly, not just for function, but for memory, not just to dwell, but to echo. This brings us, inevitably, back to the south, to the anomaly beneath the ice. In 2006, European satellites mapping gravitational changes in Antarctica identified a massive mass anomaly beneath Wilkes Land, a 300-mile-wide depression in the Earth's crust, centered beneath 2 miles of ice. NASA called it a positive gravity anomaly, a dense, buried structure. The official theory, an asteroid impact from 250 million years ago. But no debris has been found, no crater walls, no confirmed melt ejecta. What has been found through radar imaging and magnetic survey are hints of angular formations, straight lines, rectilinear shapes, anomalies too symmetrical for geology. The data is incomplete. The ice is too thick. But the pattern, if confirmed, resembles not a crater, but architecture. A buried complex, a grid. If true, it would dwarf every pyramid on Earth. What if the Earth grid was not discovered by scattered cultures but remembered, copied, adapted, diluted through time, from an original master map? And what if that original is buried under Antarctica? It would explain why so many ancient structures are aligned to now ice-bound stars, why maps like Piri Reis show the southern continent ice-free, why the oldest myths tell of floods and fire and watchers from the sky. We are not just finding isolated genius in the past. We are finding patterns, geometry, memory, and geometry does not lie. If the ancients were mapping the Earth with such precision, then what did they know about the Earth that we have forgotten? In 1947, a Swedish explorer named Finn Ron led a U.S. Navy expedition into the heart of Antarctica. His team, equipped with cutting-edge aerial reconnaissance and ground-penetrating radar, mapped nearly 250,000 square miles of uncharted territory. The official report spoke of barren glaciers, crevasses, and lifeless white. But years later, whispers leaked, accounts of radar echoes hitting beneath ice voids that were not just natural caverns, but vast symmetrical spaces. Domes, corridors, something artificial. The reports were quietly buried. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed. It remains one of the most unusual international agreements in history. 12 nations, many of them adversaries, agreed to ban military activity, mineral exploration, and permanent human settlement on the continent. They pledged to preserve it for peaceful scientific research. But only specific research. Access is restricted. Satellite data is curated. Independent exploration is functionally impossible. No other landmass on Earth is sealed off in this way. What are we not supposed to find? This question haunted Admiral Richard E. Byrd, leader of the infamous Operation High Jump in 1946-47, the largest military expedition to Antarctica in history. Byrd brought 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft, far more than needed for scientific exploration. Officially, the operation aimed to establish a research base. Unofficially, many believed the U.S. feared Nazi remnants had escaped into the southern ice. In a post-expedition interview with a Chilean newspaper, Byrd made a curious remark, that the U.S. must be prepared to face an enemy that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speed. The statement was dismissed, the interview discredited, and Byrd was soon removed from public operations. Whatever he saw, or believed he saw, it frightened him. Conspiracy theories bloomed, of course, Nazi bases, UFOs, hollow Earth. But we're not following those trails here. We're not chasing fantasy. We're following patterns, data, geography, memory. And we've arrived at exile. Because if a civilization did once flourish in Antarctica, the sudden freezing of that continent wasn't just a disaster. It was a banishment, a burial in ice, a cultural extinction event not by fire, but by frost. And the deeper wound? The survivors were scattered. Across time, we find echoes of the exiled ones. The Dogon people of Mali speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from the sky and brought knowledge of the stars, agriculture, and civilization. The Hopi tell of the Kachinas, sky ancestors who lived underground during the time of fire and water. The Egyptian Thoth, the Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl, the Sumerian Oans, deities or semi-divine beings who arrived suddenly, teaching architecture, writing, astronomy, and laws before departing into the sea or sky, always arriving after a cataclysm, always bringing lost knowledge. Were these literal beings, or remembered elders from a shattered homeland? Carl Jung wrote of archetypes, primordial images rooted in the collective unconscious. Perhaps the motif of the teacher from the sea is one such archetype. Or perhaps it's a cultural scar, a memory so traumatic it could only survive in myth. Think of the survivors. Their cities drowned, their calendars reset, their maps invalidated. All they had left were stories, star charts, oral histories. They wandered, carrying fragments of geometry, rhythm, and proportion. They built with what they remembered. They whispered of the sky. And in the frozen void they left behind, all that remained was silence. It would explain the sudden leap in human development around the globe, the abrupt emergence of agriculture, architecture, and metallurgy within a few thousand years, after hundreds of millennia of stagnation. It would explain why pyramid building emerged independently across civilizations with no known contact. It would explain why so many cultures refer to a first time, a golden age, a Zep Tepi, when gods walked with humans. What if the gods were just those who remembered? In 2016, a team of geophysicists analyzing satellite imagery over East Antarctica found thermal anomalies, heat signatures under the ice, far from any known volcanic activity. In one region, the shape of the anomaly matched the dimensions of a buried dome, nearly 3 miles wide. Again, the explanation was geological. Again, the raw data was withheld. Again, the story vanished. But ice, as it turns out, is a perfect preserver. Like amber, it can entomb a moment for tens of thousands of years, untouched, undecayed. Could there be a library beneath the ice? Not of books or scrolls, but of structures, star-aligned monoliths, calendars, resonant chambers, all pointing backward in time. And if so, what would happen if we found it? Would it destroy the chronology of our textbooks? Would it threaten the institutions built upon a linear view of history? Would it challenge the very story we tell ourselves about who we are? Perhaps that's why the silence is maintained. Because Antarctica isn't just a desert of ice. It's a vault, a locked room at the bottom of the world, holding a version of the past we were never meant to recover. But ice melts, and secrets do not stay buried forever. Already the edges of the continent are breaking. Glaciers calve into the sea, cracks spider across the surface, and what lies beneath begins to stir, revealed not by torchlight but by lidar, sonar, and thermal imaging. Soon, someone will drill a little too deep, or photograph the wrong ridge, or decrypt the right alignment. And then the exile will end. When that happens, we may not just rediscover a civilization, we may rediscover ourselves. We are taught that writing began in Sumer around 3200 BCE with the invention of cuneiform, wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay tablets. Shortly after, Egypt developed hieroglyphs, and then came Linear A and B, Sanskrit, Classical Chinese. All of them arising suddenly, fully formed, in different regions within the narrow window of just a few millennia. But what if writing didn't begin in these places? What if it re-emerged? Across the globe there are inscriptions, symbols carved into rock, bone, and temple walls that do not belong to any known language. They defy classification. They hint at syntax, at repetition, at some structured grammar, but they are not readable in any modern or ancient script. And yet they persist like ghosts in the stones. One of the most perplexing examples lies on Easter Island, the Rongorongo script. Dozens of wooden tablets covered in elegant, flowing glyphs arranged in alternating directions, a technique known as reverse boustrophodon, have puzzled linguists for over a century. The writing bears no resemblance to Polynesian languages or any known writing system. Some scholars believe it may encode astronomical data, others think it records oral histories. But the greater mystery is this: writing was supposedly never developed in isolation on the island. Where, then, did it come from? The inhabitants of Rapa Nui claimed their ancestors brought it, that it was taught by the Long Ears, or Hanau Epe, a tall, ancient race that once ruled the island and disappeared in a violent upheaval. Folklore, surely, yet the same motifs, the spiral, the eye, the double helix, appear in petroglyphs across the Pacific and even in the deserts of Australia. In the Indus Valley, thousands of stone seals bear inscriptions in a script still undeciphered. Despite decades of effort, no Rosetta Stone has been found. The symbols are consistent, suggesting a coherent language, not random pictographs. Their meaning remains locked away. Like the Rongorongo tablets, they do not appear to evolve from earlier forms. They seem to arrive all at once, developed, systematized, functional, and then they vanish. At Tortoria in Romania, 3 clay tablets were found in 1961, dated to around 5300 BCE. They bear signs, abstract and repeated, that look strikingly like proto-writing. Some researchers believe they predate Sumerian cuneiform by over 1,000 years. If true, they upend the entire chronology of written communication. But perhaps the most enigmatic writing of all is carved in stone across the megalithic sites of South America. At Tiwanaku, at Silustani, and in the highlands of Peru, there are glyphs not of letters or words, but of resonance. Acoustic symbols. Some believe they are not meant to be read with eyes, but with sound, with the reverberation of instruments or chanting inside the chambers they adorn. A language of vibration. What kind of culture builds language into structure? Encodes meaning not only in symbol, but in frequency. One that understands memory not as static inscription, but as living experience. This brings us to the strange phenomenon of entoptic patterns, geometric shapes that appear in altered states of consciousness. Shamans, cave artists, visionaries across time have reported seeing grids, spirals, nested diamonds, and zigzag lines while in trance or under the influence of psychoactive plants. The same shapes appear in the oldest cave paintings, in Australian Dreamtime art, in Aztec codices, and even in Sumerian seals. Were these visions or memories? Carl Sagan once suggested that myths may be fossils of science, echoes of forgotten knowledge passed down through metaphor. Could the same be said of language? That symbols we now dismiss as decorative once encoded frequencies, energies, instructions. In 2013, physicist Nassim Haramein proposed that certain ancient symbols encode mathematical constants, phi, pi, the golden ratio, hidden in plain sight. While controversial, His hypothesis forces a reconsideration. Were the ancients embedding knowledge in myth, in stone, in symbol, not because they lacked better tools, but because those were the only tools that would last? Because books decay, voices fade, but stone endures. If we look not for translation, but for geometry, patterns emerge. The flower of life, etched into the Osirian at Abydos in Egypt, predates Greek knowledge of sacred geometry. The same pattern appears in Chinese temples, Indian mandalas, and medieval cathedrals. Always the same ratios, always the same harmonics. These are not random designs, they are instructions. For what? Energy, architecture, consciousness? Perhaps all of them. Now imagine such a system, language as resonance, architecture as memory, myth as instruction, built into a city. A city aligned to the stars. A city tuned to the frequency of the earth itself. A city buried beneath the ice. If such a place ever existed, it would not speak in words. It would speak in ratios, in vibration, in alignment. And it would be intelligible only to those who had not forgotten how to listen. There's one more clue. In the late 1990s, Russian scientist Dr. Valery Uvarov published claims of mysterious petroglyphs found in Siberia, etched deep into basalt, arranged in mathematical sequences. He proposed they were remnants of a lost global language, one based on geometry and harmonic frequency. His work was widely dismissed, but the symbols matched others found in Armenia, Bolivia, and even Antarctica, on exposed rock faces near Queen Maud Land. Officially, these are scratches caused by glacial movement, but the geometry is too clean, too human. Could these be the last echoes of a language spoken by a civilization whose libraries were carved into bedrock? If so, then perhaps the next step in our search isn't to dig, but to listen. Because the ice may muffle sound, but it does not erase frequency. And beneath that silence, the stones may still be speaking. There is a star that once rose over Antarctica, a bright sentinel in the southern sky known as Canopus. Second only to Sirius in brightness, Canopus was revered by many ancient cultures. To the Polynesians, it was a guiding light for navigation. To the Egyptians, a point of alignment. And in Vedic cosmology, it was Agastya, the sage star, associated with spiritual knowledge and purification. But today, from most of Antarctica, Canopus is invisible, dipped forever below the horizon. Yet alignments to it remain, etched in temples, carved into stone, encoded in myth. This is the paradox. How did ancient civilizations all over the world, long before telescopes, track and revere stars that are no longer visible from their present-day locations? How did they align temples, pyramids, and observatories to celestial bodies that now lie beneath their visual plane? Unless, at the time of alignment, they were somewhere else? Not metaphorically, geographically. Here, we meet the slow but inexorable process of axial precession, the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's rotational axis. Like a spinning top, the Earth does not rotate perfectly upright, and over millennia, this wobble causes the position of the stars to shift in the sky. The ancient Greeks knew of this movement, so did the Egyptians, but the deeper implications were often lost. Because precession does more than change the constellations. It changes memory. If a civilization built an observatory to track Sirius rising at a precise point on the horizon, and that point no longer matches the star, it's not the structure that's moved, it's the sky. The Earth beneath the sky has turned, shifted, perhaps even displaced. And that brings us to a troubling question. What if some ancient sites only make sense, only align to their intended celestial markers if the Earth's crust was in a different position. We're not speaking of tectonic plates drifting over millions of years. We're speaking of crustal displacement, a sudden, catastrophic shift in the entire lithosphere. A theory advanced by Charles Hapgood, supported, at least in its initial formulation, by Albert Einstein, and now largely dismissed by modern geology, but not because the data disproves it, because the implications are too vast. Hapgood proposed that a buildup of ice at the poles could destabilize the crust, causing it to shift rapidly over the mantle, moving entire continents into new latitudinal zones. The result? Instant climate change, mass extinctions, civilizations wiped out or buried. If Antarctica were once situated thousands of miles further north, in a temperate climate zone, it could easily have supported life, possibly even advanced civilization. Then, in a matter of days or weeks, that world would be plunged into darkness and ice, frozen, sealed, forgotten. Consider this. There are no trees in Antarctica today. But in 2017, scientists drilling through the permafrost discovered fossilized remains of ancient forests, including pollen, spores, and even upright tree stumps with growth rings, suggesting that 90 million years ago, the continent was a lush, temperate rainforest. Too far back? Then fast forward to a warmer window just 120,000 years ago, during the Eemian interglacial, when sea levels were higher and Earth's poles less icebound. Could humans have lived there then? Our current model of Homo sapiens evolution allows it. Fossils in Morocco date us back over 300,000 years. The question isn't if we were there. The question is why we assume we weren't capable of greatness. We tell ourselves history began with agriculture. But what if agriculture was a fallback, a simplification? What if the real beginning lies under the snow? This might be why so many ancient myths emphasize not only celestial events, but their loss. The Dogon of Mali speak of star knowledge that was once visible but is now gone. The Hopi refer to a time when the world was turned upside down. The Polynesians tell of Haifa, a motherland now drowned or inaccessible, whose sky was closer and warmer. We are left with alignments that no longer align. Consider the Nabta Playa megalithic site in Egypt's southern desert, an early stone calendar aligned to the summer solstice sunrise and to Orion's belt as it appeared 7,000 years ago, or Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, where windows and walls track lunar standstills over 18.6-year cycles. These structures weren't improvised. They were observations, commitments to memory in stone. Many of them, again, point not to current sky positions, but to the heavens, as they appeared between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago. We keep returning to that window, that liminal time, the twilight between ice and fire, between forgotten and remembered. Nowhere is this more literal than in the alignment of the Giza pyramids to the constellation Orion, as it would have risen around 10,500 BCE. Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock proposed this correlation not as coincidence, but as intent, that the pyramids were markers of a prior epoch, a time when Orion's belt symbolized a connection between heaven and earth, when Sirius signaled rebirth, and when the Nile mirrored the Milky Way. Critics scoffed, but again, the stones didn't move. The stars did. And what of Antarctica? No pyramids rise from the ice, yet. But if we were to find symmetrical structures, aligned not to today's constellations, but to a sky from 12,000 years ago, what then? Would we recognize them? Would we even know how to look? because ancient man did not separate science from spirit. For them, the stars were not inert points of light. They were guides, ancestors, memories. To track the sky was to track the self. To build in alignment was to inscribe your place in the cosmos. So what happens when the stars shift? When the watchers who built by the stars are gone, and the sky itself no longer holds their names? We are left with shadows, with foundations that face empty horizons, with stone corridors that lead to nowhere, unless you know where to look, 12,000 years ago. And if such alignments exist beneath the ice, frozen temples pointed toward stars that no longer rise, then perhaps we are not just searching for ruins. We are searching for a memory of the sky. There's a quiet terror in the idea that the gods once walked the earth, not as mythic phantoms or divine metaphors, but as people, beings of flesh and blood, perhaps taller, perhaps wiser, perhaps just older, survivors, exiles, not born of lightning bolts or heavenly thrones, but of catastrophe, of memory, of necessity. What if the gods were those who remembered? In ancient Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were said to have descended from the heavens, bringing agriculture, law, and city building to the Sumerians. They taught men how to write, how to measure time, how to align to the stars. In Egypt, the Neteru, divine beings like Thoth, Osiris, and Isis, emerged not from chaos but from Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods ruled side by side with humans. The Mayans spoke of the sky-bearded Kukulkan descending to establish law and knowledge. In India, the 7 rishis, sages of immense power and wisdom, are said to have appeared at the beginning of each world cycle, bearing knowledge of the Vedas and cosmic law. Always they appear after disaster. Always they vanish once stability returns. Always their knowledge is encoded in stories, stars, and stones. They are remembered as gods. But what if they were human? Or rather, more than human only in the sense that they carried something we had lost, some body of knowledge, some map of the sky, some thread of continuity the rest of humanity had severed. Perhaps the aura of divinity we granted them was not supernatural at all. Perhaps it was survival. Because every myth cycle contains a warning. The gods do not come to bless, they come to restore. They come because something has broken. A cycle has ended. A flood is rising. A fire is coming. And with them, they carry a plan. Not just for rebuilding civilization, but for remembering the next time the cycle ends. The Vedic texts of India describe time in terms of yugas, ages that rise and fall over tens of thousands of years. We are now supposedly in Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, ignorance, and forgetfulness. But before this came Dvapara, Treta, and Satya Yuga, ages of increasing harmony, knowledge, and longevity. What's critical is that each transition is marked by collapse, by forgetting, and by the arrival, again, of the wise ones. This is not unique. The Maya divided time into baktuns, units of 144,000 days. Their calendar begins not in their own era, but in 3114 BCE, at the end of a previous cycle. Their mythology tells of multiple creations, each destroyed by water, fire, wind, and jaguar, each one followed by a renewal, each renewal marked by the return of beings who knew the cosmic order and re-established balance. What they all knew, what our modern science is only now rediscovering, is that Earth's climate and geologic activity are not random. They pulse, they cycle. Milankovitch cycles describe the way Earth's orbit, axial tilt, and wobble affect long-term climate. These cycles, measured in tens of thousands of years, match glacial and interglacial periods almost perfectly. Then there are solar cycles, periods of increased solar flare and sunspot activity that affect Earth's magnetic field. There are even galactic cycles, where our solar system passes through the dense arms of the Milky Way, encountering increased cosmic radiation. Now add to this the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year slow rotation of Earth's axis, and we begin to see what the ancients might have seen. Not chaos, not divine whim, but rhythm. A great, slow clock, a cosmic metronome. And perhaps the gods were simply those who could read that clock. If so, then the monuments they left behind, the pyramids, the calendars, the aligned stones, are not religious symbols. They are time markers, beacons, warnings, and perhaps one of them is under the ice. In 2018, a team analyzing satellite gravimetry data from Antarctica published findings indicating 3 anomalous mass concentrations buried under the ice. One of them, beneath Wilkes Land, is particularly massive, 300 miles wide, circular in form, and far denser than the surrounding crust. Initial theories suggested a meteor impact, yet the evidence is contradictory. No impact debris, no traditional crater wall, no global layer of shocked quartz. But the symmetry, the gravitational signature, the thermal anomalies, they remain unexplained. Now imagine that site is not a crater, but a structure, a relic, a message. What if the last of the gods, the last survivors of a previous cycle, chose to bury their final signal in the most enduring vault imaginable, Antarctica? A continent destined to be frozen, sealed off from humanity, preserved for tens of thousands of years. A silent observatory, a final temple. We would not find scrolls. We would not find gold. We would find ratios, geometry, alignment, perhaps a chamber, perhaps a structure that resonates with Earth's Schumann frequencies, perhaps an observatory that only makes sense when aligned to the stars as they appeared in 10,500 BCE. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is not empty. This is the final thread. Many ancient stories speak not only of destruction and renewal, but of a return. The gods, the wise ones, the teachers, they always promise to come back. Thoth vows to return when the stars once again align. Kukulkan is prophesied to descend when the calendar wheel completes its revolution. Vishnu incarnates in each age. Even in Norse mythology, after Ragnarok, a new world is born, and the knowledge of the past survives through a few chosen figures. These are not just religious longings. They are calendrical mechanisms. If the gods were real, survivors of a pre-flood, pre-ice civilization, then their return would not be supernatural. It would be scheduled. And perhaps the signs are already here. Solar activity is intensifying. Earth's magnetic poles are shifting. The ice is melting. We are approaching the end of a cycle, and the watchers may already be stirring. In the heart of Bolivia's Altiplano, 13,000 feet above sea level, the ruins of Tiwanaku lie in silence beneath a wide, high desert sky. Winds whip across the plateau. The stones remain, cut, placed, aligned, as if waiting for someone to remember what they once meant. To most, they are just remnants of a forgotten city. But to those who look closer, Tiwanaku is a problem. A structure that should not stand, a mystery of impossible precision, anachronistic engineering, and cosmic geometry that echoes, once again, the fingerprint of a civilization that knew too much, too early. Mainstream archaeology dates Tiwanaku to around 500 CE. But that dating refers to when the city was re-inhabited, not built. The earliest layers, buried beneath sediment and volcanic ash, suggest something far older. Arthur Posnanski, the early 20th century explorer and engineer, spent decades measuring Tiwanaku's alignments and proposed that the site was originally constructed around 15,000 BCE, based on astronomical calculations involving solar solstices and the precession of the equinoxes. His work, though dismissed for nearly a century, is quietly resurfacing. Because the stones do not lie. The Akapana Pyramid, now eroded, is a stepped platform that mirrors the sacred geometry of Mesoamerican temples, but with engineering subtleties unique to the Andes. Subterranean drainage systems, geomagnetic alignments, and an inner core of diorite, a stone harder than granite, suggest design intent far beyond what primitive builders were supposed to understand. And then there is Puma Punku. Just a few kilometers from Tiwanaku, the scattered megaliths of Puma Punku defy conventional explanation. Massive H-shaped blocks lie strewn across the landscape, many weighing over 100 tons. They're carved with right angles, recessed joints, and precision drill holes, features we associate with modern machine tooling. Yet no evidence exists of metal tools or wheeled transport among the pre-Inca cultures. One block contains an inner channel carved with such symmetry that even today, using laser scans, engineers find themselves baffled. Who made these? How did they transport them? And why is the site constructed with a complexity seemingly far beyond its time? Some say it's erosion, others say coincidence. But the deeper one looks, the more absurd those answers sound. Consider this. The layout of Puma Punku appears to match not the constellations visible today, but those as they appeared over 10,000 years ago. Once again, we find the same motif. Stellar alignment, memory in stone, a date encoded in geometry that predates the known rise of civilization by millennia. But if the builders were not local to the high Andes, if they were survivors, refugees from a cataclysm, then the altitude makes sense. High ground would have been essential in the wake of melting glaciers, rising oceans, and shifting climates. Tiwanaku may not have been a place of origin, but of reassembly. Perhaps that's why its iconography is so strange. The most iconic artifact is the Gateway of the Sun, a megalithic archway carved from a single block of andesite. At its top is the figure known as the Weeping God, or staff deity, a humanoid figure with rays emanating from its head, holding objects in both hands. Around him are winged figures with animal heads, some resembling condors, others feline, serpent, or jackal forms. These are not decorations. They are markers, symbols found across ancient cultures, from Mesopotamia to Egypt to Mesoamerica. The winged god, the serpent staff, the central figure holding the keys of power, of knowledge. Who was he? To the Inca, he was Viracocha, the great civilizer who came from across the sea in a time of darkness. To others, he was the teacher, the founder, the one who knew the cycles. He arrived with long robes, light skin, and wisdom. He was not worshipped as a god, but remembered as a presence. A story echoed on Easter Island, where the long ears came from the east. In Mesoamerica, where Quetzalcoatl brought the calendar. In the Pacific, where tales of a sunken homeland persist in dozens of island traditions. The pieces begin to gather like broken teeth of the same skull, and perhaps Tiwanaku was never meant to be a city in the modern sense, but a memory vault, a sacred clock, coded in stone, a cathedral of resonance. because if we analyze its orientation, the gateway of the sun aligns with solar solstices. If we scan its glyphs, we find not only stellar symbols, but possible counts of days, lunar cycles, and even the precessional rhythm. It is a monument not only of art, but of time. And if such structures exist in the Andes, far above sea level, far from tectonic zones of collapse, what might lie in the forgotten lowlands, in the jungles, in the submerged shelf just off the Peruvian coast? What might lie under ice? If an older civilization knew of Earth's cycles, knew of floods, pole shifts, and solar events, then it makes sense that they would build in stone, at altitude, in alignment. They would leave messages not in language but in layout, not in stories but in stars. And Tiwanaku may be one of the last places where that message can still be seen. We dismiss it because we cannot translate it. But what if we're looking at it the wrong way? What if these structures are not meant to be read, but felt, heard? What if they vibrate at a frequency that opens memory, not just of the past, but of the pattern? Then the question is not who built Tiwanaku. It is, who left it for us to find? And what did they want us to remember before the cycle turned again? Somewhere off the southern coast of Okinawa, in the shadowed waters of the East China Sea, ancient steps rise from the seabed. Monolithic terraces, flat platforms, sharp right angles, structures that should not exist under 60 feet of water. Discovered in 1986 by diver Kihachiro Aratake, these formations near Yonaguni Island have stirred one of the great debates in modern archaeology. Are they natural, or are they the remains of a civilization drowned by the rising seas at the end of the last ice age? To swim among the Yonaguni monument is to feel unease, not from its scale alone, but from its silence. Massive steps stretch across 300 feet of seafloor. Some are 12 feet high. There are vertical shafts, flat roads, and a triangular pool that seems, impossibly, symmetrical. Divers have found what appear to be carved symbols and animal motifs etched into the walls. Tool marks, perhaps, or illusion. The ocean, after all, is an eraser. Mainstream science classifies Yonaguni as a geologic formation, fractured sandstone shaped by tectonic forces and ocean currents. But as with so many other ancient enigmas, the explanation feels incomplete. It explains the existence of stone. It does not explain the plan, because there is a pattern here, not just of structure, but of position. Yonaguni lies on what was once part of the Sunda Shelf, a massive stretch of land that connected modern-day Indonesia, Malaysia, and parts of Japan before sea levels rose. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, vast portions of Southeast Asia were dry land, hosting river systems, forests, and, possibly, human settlements. When the ice melted, that land was swallowed. We do not search there because it is inconvenient. But the sea remembers. And Yonaguni is not alone. Further south, in the Gulf of Khambhat, India, sonar surveys in 2001 revealed linear formations beneath 120 feet of murky water. A city-shaped grid. Divers retrieved pottery shards, fossilized bones, and carved blocks. Carbon dating returned results ranging from 4,000 to over 9,000 years old. Some geologists argued the data was flawed. Others insisted the structures were natural. But the underwater images show repeating angles, stair-like designs, and road-like features. Too artificial to ignore. Too ancient to accept. The city was dubbed Dwarka, after the legendary Golden City said to have sunk into the sea following the death of Lord Krishna. In the Mahabharata, Dwarka is described with astonishing detail. palaces, gates, celestial alignments, and its sudden disappearance is said to mark the end of an age. Myth or fractured memory? Even further west, off the coast of Cuba, in 2001, a Canadian team working with Cuban scientists used sonar to discover what appeared to be symmetrical structures nearly 2,000 feet beneath the ocean surface. Pyramidal shapes, road-like paths, geometrical layouts. The depth suggests a sinking date of over 10,000 years ago. No follow-up expeditions were funded. The story vanished. Why do we repeatedly find monumental shapes beneath oceans, dating to the very time period we are told civilization did not yet exist? And more critically, why are they always aligned to the stars? At Yonaguni, independent researchers claim the layout mirrors the Pleiades cluster, also known as the Seven Sisters, a group of stars worshipped across dozens of ancient cultures. In Australia, the Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of the Seven Sisters chased across the sky by Orion. In Greece, the same cluster marks the origin of heroes and gods. In Japan, they are Subaru, symbolizing unity and movement. And in Mesoamerican cosmology, they mark the beginning of great cycles of time. This is not cultural coincidence. It is a star map, repeated globally, tied to seasons, to calendars, to stories of origin and catastrophe. But the Pleiades are more than just a celestial grouping. Their rising and setting were used by ancient people to signal agricultural cycles, ceremonial dates, and, in many traditions, the return of lost ancestors. Who were these ancestors? Why did so many ancient people associate them with the sea, the stars, and forgotten knowledge? Some propose the Pleiades were a symbolic memory of survivors, those who fled a sunken homeland and followed the stars to new shores. In Polynesia, voyaging chants describe navigators steering by the Seven Sisters across vast oceans. The direction? South to north. From where? A land now unnamed. We must ask, is the global reverence for the Pleiades a cosmic coincidence or a navigational fingerprint? Consider this. The constellation Orion and the Pleiades appear prominently in the southern skies during the epoch between 12,000 and 10,000 BCE. At that time, due to precession, these stars rose in alignment with certain landmarks now underwater. The sky, once again, matches the ruins, time encoded in stone, this time beneath the waves. But why hide knowledge in alignment? Why code memory in architecture? Because stone and stars do not forget. They outlive stories, languages, and floods. If a civilization existed before the end of the last ice age, before the glacial melt raised sea levels by 400 feet and wiped out 10 million square miles of coastline, then its libraries would not have been parchment. They would have been megaliths, star temples, underwater calendars, not to be understood by those who followed, but to be found. And maybe that's all Yonaguni is, not a city, not a monument, but a memory, a fixed point on Earth, aligned with a fixed point in the sky, designed to be rediscovered by those who remember to look, not where we live, but where we drown. Because the sea is not a grave, it is a veil. And if we learn to read beneath the tide, we may find that the stars we thought were silent have been singing from below all along. There's a line we were all taught to accept without question. The equator. The Earth's waist, circling its spherical body at 0 degrees latitude, dividing north from south, heat from cold, growth from ice. It's a constant in our minds, a fixed belt of solar symmetry. But what if that line moved? Not the imaginary line itself, but the land beneath it. What if, in the deep past, the Earth's crust slipped like loose skin around its molten core, shifting entire continents to new latitudes, pulling equatorial regions toward the poles and vice versa? What if the equator we know today is not the equator that once was? It's a dangerous idea, because it undermines the foundation of historical climate models, archaeological dating, and even the placement of ancient monuments. But it's not unfounded. Geophysicist Charles Hapgood, often dismissed yet never disproven, introduced the concept of crustal displacement in the 1950s. Unlike plate tectonics, which unfolds over millions of years, Hapgood's theory proposed that large sections of the Earth's outer shell could shift dramatically in a relatively short time, triggered by an imbalance in polar ice mass or by external forces like solar flares or planetary alignments. It sounds radical, but Einstein found it worth considering, offering his cautious endorsement of Hapgood's early manuscripts, writing, "In a polar region there is a continual deposition of ice. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrically deposited masses. This will cause the Earth's crust to shift." Now, layer on this. The ancient monuments of the world, many of them, do not seem to align to the current equator, but they do align to each other. Engineer Jim Allison, in a series of geospatial studies, plotted a great circle connecting the Great Pyramid of Giza, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, Angkor Wat, the Nazca Lines, Mohenjo-Daro, and several other sites. They form a nearly perfect equatorial ring, tilted 30 degrees from today's equator. A different axis, a different balance. Was this deliberate, or a coincidence born of creative cartography? To find out, researchers analyzed the orientation of ancient structures, not just individual pyramids, but entire city plans. They found that many ancient sites share a common alignment, not with cardinal directions, but with what would have been cardinal directions on a differently tilted Earth. In other words, the ancients were building for a sky that no longer exists above them. And then there's the orientation of temples and causeways. At Giza, the Sphinx gazes directly at the rising sun on the spring equinox, but only as it appeared around 10,500 BCE, when the constellation Leo was on the horizon. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat mirrors the Draco constellation as it appeared at the same epoch. The alignment is off today, but it wasn't then. What could explain this global pattern? One answer: they were built before the crust moved. Another: they were built to remember when the crust moved. Consider the implications. If Antarctica was once along a different latitude, closer to today's temperate zones, then the discovery of ancient forests, fossilized pollen, and subglacial lakes filled with liquid water is not surprising. It's expected. It supports not only the possibility of life, but of habitation. And if, as Hapgood suggested, a previous pole was located near Hudson Bay, then the crust would have rotated about 30 degrees, pulling Antarctica down, dragging Siberia towards the Arctic, and shifting entire climates overnight. Is there evidence? Yes, in the strangest of places: mammoth stomachs. In the frozen tundra of Siberia, remains of woolly mammoths have been found with undigested buttercups and grasses in their bellies, plants that do not grow in the freezing conditions of modern-day Arctic Russia. These mammoths died suddenly, frozen instantly, suggesting not a slow climate change but an abrupt, catastrophic shift. Their flesh is sometimes still preserved, as if flash frozen. A freezer door slammed shut on a green, grazing world. And what if that door closed not just on mammoths, but on cities? Imagine a civilization living in what is now East Antarctica, building observatories, temples, maps. They build by the stars, align their cities to solstices, plant by the seasons. Then the sky changes, the stars drift, the climate begins to shudder. They sense something is wrong. And one day it happens. A crustal displacement shifts their land toward the pole. Temperatures plummet. Glaciers advance. Sea levels rise everywhere else. Those who escape flee north, carrying shards of their knowledge, fragments of memory. They speak of the sun darkening, of the gods falling, of the world being turned upside down. We now call these myths. But the data aligns. Ice core samples from Antarctica and Greenland show sudden jumps in temperature and greenhouse gases around 11,600 years ago. At the same time, sea levels rose rapidly, swallowing coastlines, creating the English Channel, sinking the Sunda Shelf. Tectonic evidence shows stress lines where none should be, and gravity anomalies in Antarctica suggest massive shifts in crustal density, possibly from underneath structures buried in silence. This theory is not accepted, but it is not disproven. It simply waits, and the monuments still whisper. Why do so many ancient cities include detailed astronomical tracking systems? Why do myths so often speak of a time when the sun stood still or when the sky changed? Why are global flood stories so tightly bound to celestial events? Because the ancients were not naive. They were observant, and they were afraid. They knew that the sky was not eternal, that the land was not fixed, that time was not linear. They knew, because they had seen it happen before. So what of the equator? Perhaps the real question is not where it is now, but where it used to be, and what still lies along that forgotten line, waiting, silent, under sea and ice, until we remember how to look sideways at the sky. There is a symbol that appears almost everywhere ancient eyes once looked upward: the circle. Sometimes it's the sun, sometimes a wheel, sometimes an eye staring back from the heavens. But always it returns. From the petroglyphs of the American Southwest to the standing stones of Avebury, from the labyrinth carvings of the Mediterranean to the mandalas of the East, the circle, whether etched in stone or burned into myth, is the one constant shape. Why? It's the simplest shape, the most natural, but also the most powerful. In the earliest calendars, Babylonian, Mayan, Egyptian, the movement of time was circular. There was no progress, no straight arrow forward. Time was a wheel, a revolution, an endless turning of seasons, epochs, and ages. Each rise brought decay, each fall brought rebirth. But what if the ancients didn't simply observe this? What if they measured it? In 2012, an ancient bronze disk surfaced from a field in Nebra, Germany. Tarnished green with gold inlays, the Nebra sky disk shocked researchers. It dated to around 1600 BCE, millennia before Galileo, and yet depicted the Pleiades, the sun, the crescent moon, and a solar bar aligned to solstices. It was not a piece of art. It was an instrument, a star map, an encoded key, and it fit perfectly into a greater tradition of encoding celestial cycles into circular devices. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, is another such anomaly. A complex clockwork of bronze gears and inscriptions, it tracked lunar cycles, planetary motions, and even eclipses. Dated to around 100 BCE, it demonstrates a level of astronomical sophistication we didn't believe possible in the ancient world. It was, quite literally, a computer of the sky. But these are only the fragments we've found. What if they were part of something much older? A knowledge system passed through generations of oral culture, eventually miniaturized and encoded into bronze or stone, but originating from a time before metals, before writing, before the ice? Because the circle isn't just a symbol of time, it's a code. And that code is everywhere. The megalithic builders of Europe, who left behind stone circles like Stonehenge, Callanish, and the Ring of Brodgar, aligned their constructions not randomly, but precisely, to lunar standstills, to equinoxes, to precessional shifts that take millennia to complete. The builders of Gobekli Tepe over 11,000 years ago did the same, encoding the movement of constellations into the very bones of their architecture. Even the ancient city plans of Teotihuacan in Mexico and Persepolis in Persia reflect circular symmetry around cosmological centers. The axis mundi, the world pillar, the point where heaven touches earth. But what if these were more than sacred designs? What if they were maps, functional blueprints not of territory, but of time? The Mayan calendar, with its 3 interlocking wheels, the Tzolk'in, the Hab, and the long count, is perhaps the most famous example. It does not mark time in hours or years, but in baktuns, katuns, tuns, vast cycles spanning thousands of years. And its greatest revolution? A full calendar round of 5,125 years, ending in 2012 and beginning again, just like a wheel completing its spin. Many dismissed that moment as New Age hysteria. But they missed the point. The Mayans weren't predicting apocalypse. They were marking a phase shift, a turning, and not just them. In Vedic cosmology, the Yuga cycles, Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali, complete in a circle of over 24,000 years. The number is familiar. It's nearly identical to the cycle of axial precession, 25,772 years, the time it takes for the Earth's wobble to complete one revolution. A number that appears again and again, hidden in myths, architecture, and numbers across cultures. The Egyptians divided their calendar into great years, matching precessional cycles. The Zoroastrians calculated world ages that mirror solar patterns. Even the Sumerians, with their inexplicable sexagesimal system, base 60, appear to have encoded harmonics of precession and planetary periods. And all of it, every fragment, every calendar, every temple, is circular. So what does this have to do with Antarctica? Everything. Because if a civilization existed before the end of the last ice age, before the crust moved and the equator shifted, then they would have seen the sky differently. Their constellations would rise in other places. Their solstices would fall at different times. But their cycles would remain. And the best way to remember a cycle is to build it in stone, as a circle. If there is an ancient structure buried beneath Antarctica, a temple, a city, a calendar, it will be circular. It will align not to the stars of today, but to the sky of 12,000 years ago. And it will encode a message not in words, but in ratios, in revolutions, in alignments. It might have entrances at 23.5 degrees, the Earth's axial tilt. It might be divided into 360 segments, not for degrees of a circle, but for days in a year. It might echo with frequencies of 432 Hz or 528 Hz, tones found in sacred chants, in temple acoustics, and in the physics of matter. We won't recognize it as a message, not at first, because we no longer think in cycles. We think in lines, in beginnings and ends, in now or never, but the ancients thought in return, in spirals, in recurrence, and they built their monuments not just to honor the past, but to survive the fall, to warn us when the wheel came around again. So perhaps the circle is not just a symbol of time or a sacred form. Perhaps it is the message itself, a code so simple, so elegant, so persistent, that it could travel through flood and fire, through ice and exile, and still spin, waiting for us to find the center. In 2006, NASA's GRACE satellites, a pair of precision instruments designed to detect subtle changes in Earth's gravity field, picked up something strange beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. Not just a denser-than-expected patch of crust, not just an ancient impact basin, but an anomaly, massive, circular, and deep. The Wilkes Land Gravity Anomaly. Its size was staggering, 300 miles across and 500 miles wide, extending under more than a mile of solid ice. The official explanation was a possible asteroid impact, perhaps the one that triggered the Permian-Triassic extinction event 250 million years ago. But there was a problem. No clear crater, no shatter cone signatures, no iridium layer, no known global debris pattern, just gravity, a pull, a presence. And then came the magnetic readings, suggesting structural regularity, linear patterns, right angles, intersections, features that didn't match any known volcanic, tectonic, or meteoric event. But the ice was thick, the region was remote, and the answers, once again, went cold. Except to a handful of quiet eyes watching from above. In 2011, classified reconnaissance satellites scanned the anomaly again, this time with higher resolution radar and thermal imaging. Leaked reports, not officially confirmed but never denied, suggested the presence of voids, cavernous hollows in the ice, large enough to house buildings, large enough, some claimed, to house entire cities. Impossible. That was the consensus. But so is the fact that Antarctica wasn't always cold. We know now, from core samples and ancient sediments, that for most of its history Antarctica was warm, wet, and forested. Not just in the distant age of dinosaurs, but much more recently, within the last 2 million years, and possibly as recently as 120,000 years ago, during the last interglacial period. Fossilized pollen, leaf imprints, and marine organisms found in subglacial lakes all tell the same story. This was once a vibrant, living continent, and not all of it froze at once. The East Antarctic ice sheet, the very region where the gravity anomaly was found, is the oldest and thickest. But it didn't simply appear. It built over time. Layer by layer, snowfall compacted into ice, preserving everything underneath it. Air bubbles, pollen grains, dust from ancient volcanoes, and possibly structures. The idea is heresy, yet it keeps surfacing. In 2017, a team drilling into Lake Mercer, buried beneath 4,000 feet of ice, recovered microbial life. Not frozen, alive, sealed off from the surface for tens of thousands of years. If organisms can survive there, what else could? More provocatively, what might have been there before the freeze? There are legends. Always there are legends. In the lore of the Aboriginal Tasmanians, whose oral traditions stretch further back than most written history, there are stories of a southern land where the sun touched the earth more directly, where the stars circled differently, and where ancestors once walked. A place of brilliance, of eventual silence. Some of these tales point not to the Australian mainland, but to a land that once lay beyond it, swallowed by sea, swallowed by ice. In ancient Chinese cartography, there exist maps that depict a land of the south, detailed beyond what was thought possible before the age of exploration. Some scholars dismiss these as artistic flourishes. Others point out that such maps often bear a strange resemblance to the subglacial topography of modern Antarctica. And then there's the legend of Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. For centuries, European mapmakers insisted on the existence of a massive southern continent long before it was officially charted. They didn't guess. They remembered, based on older charts, on older stories, on whispers passed through cultures that never met. The ice came later, and when it did, it came fast. Around 12 to 800 years ago, the Earth experienced what climatologists now call the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to glacial conditions after a period of warming. The trigger remains debated. Comet impact, massive meltwater pulse, or disruption of oceanic currents. But what matters is what happened. Temperatures plunged, ice sheets re-advanced, sea levels stalled, then rose explosively. And in the south, Antarctica froze. But freeze isn't just a temperature. It's a silence, a lock, a shutdown of memory. The problem is, ice doesn't just cover, it crushes. Any structure beneath a mile of ice would be deformed, broken, pulverized, unless it was designed not to resist it, but to work with it. This brings us to the concept of self-burying architecture, a hypothetical design principle in which structures are intended to be sealed, protected, and insulated by geologic forces. The great vaults of Svalbard, storing seeds for future generations, use this principle. So do underground observatories, so do ancient tombs. If an advanced civilization foresaw a planetary shift, a glaciation, a pole displacement, might they not have prepared for it? Might they have chosen the one place on Earth where their memory could survive in silence? Not in Egypt, where sand shifts, not in the jungle where roots devour, not by the sea where salt corrodes, but in the coldest, driest, most stable environment on Earth, a continent-sized freezer. Antarctica is the only place where layers of time are preserved in order, one atop the next. It is, quite literally, a chronological library. Ice cores from Dome C contain atmospheric data from 800,000 years ago. And beneath that ice, if something unnatural exists, be it a dome, a vault, a monument, we may soon be able to detect it, because the ice is melting. The West Antarctic ice sheet is unstable. Pine Island and Thwaites glaciers are retreating faster than predicted. Satellite radar now peers further into the ice than ever before. Private aerospace companies have begun selling data once reserved for militaries. The veil is thinning, and in the places where the ice retreats, we're finding more than just rock. We're finding patterns, angles, anomalies, and questions no longer so easily dismissed. If there is a structure beneath the Wilkes Land anomaly, what was it built for? And if it wasn't meant to be discovered until the next cycle, then what happens when we open the door too early? In every ancient culture, there are outliers, figures who don't fit the timeline, who seem to arrive fully formed, bearing knowledge too advanced for their time. Scribes, astronomers, architects, lawgivers, those who knew when to plant, how to build, what the stars would do next. And again, the records treat them not as students of the age they lived in, but as survivors of something older. The Greeks called them Prometheus, the titan who gave fire, technology, knowledge to humanity, and was punished for it. In Sumer, it was Oannes, who emerged from the sea, taught men language and mathematics, then returned to the depths each night. In Egypt, Thoth was the divine scribe who remembered the first time and kept the secrets of geometry and the heavens. In Mesoamerica, it was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, bringer of calendars and architecture. These beings didn't just know, they remembered. But what were they remembering? The more one studies these figures, the clearer it becomes. They were marked, not as gods in the divine sense, but as those who came from a place that no longer existed. Their knowledge wasn't mystical. It was functional, practical, technical. And it often came with a warning, because those who remembered also remembered the fall. The destruction of the last cycle is always there, just behind the curtain of myth. Fire from the sky, floods that swallowed mountains, darkness that lingered for days, a great forgetting that had to be rebuilt one stone at a time. And it wasn't just catastrophe, it was consequence. In the Aztec codices, the gods debate whether to give knowledge back to humans, fearing that we would again abuse it. In Greek myth, Zeus forbids Prometheus from aiding humanity, knowing what the fire will lead to. In Hindu cosmology, the Mahabharata speaks of wars waged with weapons that left cities smoldering, skies darkened, and people with hair and nails falling out, a description hauntingly reminiscent of radiation sickness. These are not primitive stories. These are encoded trauma, and trauma has a way of persisting. Throughout time, certain groups have claimed to guard ancient knowledge. The Egyptian priesthood, the Mayan calendar keepers, the Druids of the British Isles, the Dogon elders of Mali. These were not just religious figures. They were memory holders. The Dogon, for example, have detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system, including Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by modern telescopes in the 20th century. Yet they speak of it as if it had always been known, passed down through ritual, through initiation, through protected oral traditions that defy explanation. When asked where their knowledge came from, the Dogon say it was given by the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the sky and the water. We call this myth. But the details are precise, technical, repeatable. They remembered something, or someone, and the story is always the same. Those who knew were silenced, hunted, misunderstood. Because to remember the last fall is to question the entire structure of this rise, even within the mystery schools of later antiquity, Pythagoreans, Hermetics, Gnostics, there exists a consistent narrative that the knowledge held in secret was not new, but inherited, that the secrets of geometry, vibration, and celestial movement were ancient and dangerous in the wrong hands. That true knowledge must be encoded in symbol, in structure, in alignment, so that only the worthy could uncover it. Why such secrecy? Because power divorced from wisdom is catastrophic. Perhaps the last cycle proved that. And so the knowledge was fragmented, buried, hidden in myth, song, stone. Now imagine this, a group of survivors, escaping a global collapse, whether by fire, flood, or ice, carrying only what they could remember, not objects, but principles. How to measure the stars, how to orient a temple, how to encode precession into cycles, how to build resonance into stone. They wander, finding new land, new people, and begin again, not to rule, but to preserve, to seed. They become legends, not because of magic, but because of memory. Their descendants become priesthoods, lineages, orders, and their legacy becomes the scattered brilliance we now call ancient wonders. But they carried a burden. They knew the wheel would turn again. In every system that tracks long cycles, Mayan, Vedic, Zoroastrian, even Platonic, there's a date when the current cycle ends and a new one begins. And disturbingly, many of those systems converge around now. The Mayan long count ended in 2012. Kali Yuga is said by some interpretations to end within the next 100 years. The Great Year, the precessional cycle, will shift into a new zodiacal age within decades. It could be coincidence, or it could be the clock chiming midnight. And if that's true, then the ones who remembered last time left us warnings, not in books, but in monuments, in alignments, in persistent myths, in the structures we now call impossible. They were not trying to impress us. They were trying to tell us something. And perhaps, just perhaps, what lies beneath the ice is not a city or a machine or a power source. Perhaps it's a message, a record not of who they were, but of what they endured, and of what we must remember before the forgetting happens again. In 1994, deep in the limestone hills of southern France, 3 amateur speleologists slipped through a narrow crevice and discovered what would become one of the most haunting windows into the prehistoric mind: the Chauvet Cave. Inside, perfectly preserved by a rockfall for over 30,000 years, they found something that shattered every assumption about our ancestors. Hundreds of paintings, sophisticated in style, layered in technique, and resonant in symbolic power. Horses gallop in fluid motion. Lions stare with intensity. Hands reach out, not as decoration, but as if attempting to communicate across time. And in the center of it all, a circle of red dots, a solar symbol, a wheel. These were not primitive sketches by simple hunter-gatherers. These were compositions, intentional, rhythmic, harmonious. But who were these people? They had no written language, no cities, no known calendar. Yet they captured motion, emotion, cosmology. The walls of Chauvet are not just art. They are breath, memory suspended in pigment. What if these weren't the first artists, but the last of a remembering people? It's a pattern we see too often. Complexity at the beginning, followed by decline. Gobekli Tepe, with its towering pillars and encoded alignments, emerges fully formed around 9600 BCE, only to be deliberately buried and forgotten. Tiwanaku, appearing without precedent. Mohenjo-Daro, with its sewer systems and urban planning, vanished. It is as if each of these civilizations were born not in ascent, but in echo. And always, there is the stone. From the pyramids of Egypt to the dolmens of Korea, from Malta to Easter Island, the medium remains the same. Not clay, not wood, not even bronze, but stone. Immovable, enduring, capable of holding not just weight, but vibration. Modern science is only beginning to understand what the ancients seemed to know: that stone, particularly certain types like granite, limestone, and basalt, can conduct, store, and reflect energy. These are not metaphors. The Great Pyramid, for instance, is constructed largely of limestone with inner chambers lined with granite, materials with high piezoelectric properties. When subjected to pressure, they produce electric charge. Why would the ancients care? Because vibration is more than sound. It is structure. The universe itself hums. From quantum fields to black hole accretion disks, all of reality vibrates at fundamental frequencies. Cymatics, the study of visible sound, shows us that frequencies create patterns in physical matter. Sand on a vibrating plate arranges itself into mandalas, hexagons, spirals. Change the frequency, and the pattern changes. What if ancient structures were designed not just to be seen, but to be heard? Archaeoacoustics, a young but growing field, has revealed that many ancient temples, tombs, and monuments resonate at very specific frequencies, often those linked with altered states of consciousness. In Malta's Hal Saflieni Hypogum, a subterranean temple carved from limestone, chanting at 110 Hz produces physical sensations in the body and visual hallucinations in the mind. In the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, a low-frequency hum can be detected, especially when multiple people chant or tone in harmony. These are not accidents, they are designs, and stone is the conduit. Now imagine this. Beneath the ice of Antarctica, a chamber, sealed, forgotten, built not only to endure the cold, but to use it. A structure of resonance, of frequency, designed not to store knowledge in written form, but to encode it in vibration. A song that has not been sung for 12,000 years. What would happen if we activated it? Would we understand it? Could we? Because the ancients may not have seen knowledge as we do. Linear, alphabetic, stored in libraries. They may have seen it as harmony, as music, as resonance between the self, the earth, and the sky. A civilization of engineers and artists who built not merely to house, but to harmonize. And perhaps what we call memory, they called tone. This might explain the global obsession with bells, gongs, chanting, and drums. It might explain the the chants of the Gregorian, the repeating tones in Aboriginal song lines, each a key, each a pitch, each unlocking something more than mind, something in the earth itself. Could this be why so many ancient temples are aligned to both celestial events and geophysical anomalies? Were they not only observatories, but instruments? Then consider what's under the ice. We assume stone is dead. But stone can sing. And what if the stone beneath Antarctica, protected for millennia, under perfect pressure, perfectly cold, is not inert? What if it's waiting? The melting of the ice isn't just a climatological event, it's a geological unsealing, the largest release of buried land in the history of our species. Satellite data already reveals mountain ranges, dry valleys, and strange symmetry emerging as glaciers retreat. Seismic readings hint at cavities, domes, spaces large enough to dwarf anything we've built in the modern age. But we still do not look. Or rather, we do, but in silence. High-resolution radar, magnetic anomaly maps, and gravimetric surveys continue. But what's made public is fragmented, sanitized. And always, there is the question, what lies deeper? Perhaps the reason Antarctica remains sealed politically, by treaties, by red tape, by selective funding, is not because of what's happening now, but because of what someone already found. And perhaps they heard something, a resonance, a hum, a breath deep in the ice, because stone does not forget, it only waits, and some stones still breathe. The ancients didn't just look to the stars, they mirrored them. They took the heavens and folded them downward, etched them into the ground, aligned cities, pyramids, and temples not simply for the sake of orientation, but to reflect the cosmos. As above, so below? It was not a poetic metaphor. It was architecture. It was instruction. This practice, known today as celestial cartography or sky-ground correlation, is visible all across the world. The three great pyramids of Giza are positioned to mimic the belt stars of Orion. Teotihuacan, with its Avenue of the Dead and Temple of the Sun, maps the path of Venus across the sky. The Nabta Playa stones in southern Egypt form a star map of Orion as it appeared over 7,000 years ago. Angkor Wat in Cambodia replicates the constellation Draco. Each site encodes not only placement, but time. The stars are frozen in stone. These aren't isolated cases. They're a pattern. And if we consider Earth as a canvas, then we must also ask, is there a global star map? A planetary constellation? Something encoded in the positioning of sacred sites? Researcher and engineer William Becker, along with geographer Beth Hagins, proposed in the 1990s what they called the Earth Grid Theory. By overlaying a geometric icosahedron and dodecahedron over a globe, they found that many of the world's ancient sites, Easter Island, Giza, Mohenjo-Daro, the Bermuda and Dragon's Triangles, fell along specific nodal points, not randomly, repeatedly. These nodal points, they argued, were more than geographic. They were energetic. Places where the Earth's magnetic field, gravitational harmonics, and possibly even unknown terrestrial forces concentrated. Whether or not the grid exists in a literal sense, the clustering of ancient sites on great circles and latitudinal symmetry cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Someone long ago saw Earth from above, or more eerily, knew how to model it. And what they placed on Earth was not random. It was a mirror, a reflection of the sky, a memory of origin, a code. But a code needs a key, and that key may lie not in what was built, but when it was built. The constellations are not fixed. Due to precession, the wobble of the Earth's axis, our view of the sky shifts over time. Polaris hasn't always been the North Star. Orion doesn't always rise where it does now, and this change is slow, measurable, and predictable. If ancient monuments encode specific stellar positions, then they also encode dates. The Giza pyramids align to Orion's belt as it appeared around 10,000 or 500 BCE. The Sphinx gazes east toward the constellation Leo, also in that same era. Angkor Wat's alignment to Draco points to roughly the same time frame. Even the layout of Stonehenge suggests solar and lunar tracking from an epoch far earlier than its conventional dating. What are the odds that multiple, globally disconnected cultures all decided to reflect the same sky from the same era in stone? Unless they weren't disconnected. Unless they were remembering the same thing. A sky that existed before the last great cataclysm. A sky that presided over a world we've forgotten. A sky seen from a place that no longer watches the stars. And perhaps Antarctica was part of that map. In recent years, radar scans beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet have revealed linear ridges and patterns in the bedrock that, when plotted, exhibit unnatural geometry. Some formations form near-perfect angles. Others appear circular. Rings, like henges or ancient observatories. These could be geological, or they could be ground plans. But what if they are more than just ground plans? What if they are celestial maps? If so, the next question is chilling. Which part of the sky do they reflect? In 2013, a speculative modeling project cross-referenced bedrock formations beneath Antarctica with sky positions from 12,000 years ago. Using the reconstructed rotational axis and latitude shift based on a pre-crustal displacement model, the simulation suggested that the Wilkes Land anomaly, when corrected for possible pole movement, would align with the southern constellations Centaurus and Crux, the Southern Cross. In many traditions, the Southern Cross represents transition, death and rebirth, navigation through darkness. It is the axis upon which the southern sky turns. And in Egyptian iconography, the Djed pillar, a symbol of stability and resurrection, is sometimes associated with this region of the heavens. Not overtly, not as a literal map, but as resonance, as idea. Imagine a structure beneath Antarctica, circular, vast, aligned to Crux and Centaurus as they appeared 12,000 years ago. A mirror of the stars beneath ice, not to worship, but to remember. Not just a monument, but a map. A message that reads not in symbols, but in sky. Because the ancients didn't just track the heavens, they treated them as memory. And perhaps the last thing they built before the ice came was a constellation beneath their feet. A vault of stellar data. A code locked in stone. The Greeks spoke of mnemosyne, the titaness of memory, whose name gave rise to the word mnemonic. Her daughters, the Muses, inspired all forms of knowledge: history, astronomy, geometry, music. The Greeks knew what we've forgotten, that memory is not passive. It is active. It must be protected, coded, sung, aligned. In Antarctica, the greatest muse may lie buried, not in the form of a goddess, but in stone. Geometry, orientation, frequencies of the earth harmonizing with the sky. And perhaps when we learn to decode this planetary constellation, when we recognize the layout of the stars etched into the very crust beneath the ice, then we will finally begin to see that our past is not missing. It's mirrored. And all we need to do is look down. In the mythologies of the Hopi, the Egyptians, the Hindus, the Maya, time is not linear. It doesn't stretch out like a rope to be pulled. It curls, loops, repeats. Time is not a road, but a spiral staircase, each revolution lifting you higher, yes, but always back over the same ground. The same lessons, the same sky, the same fall. Modern science disagrees. It says time is an arrow. Entropy increases. The past is fixed, the future unwritten. But even here, there is tension. Einstein saw time as malleable, bending, distorting, connected inseparably with space. In quantum theory, time becomes even stranger. At the subatomic level, particles behave as if time flows both forward and backward, as if cause and effect are optional, as if the past is still there, waiting. The ancients seem to know this, or at least they built for it. Consider the so-called coincidences in ancient calendars. The Sumerians calculated the sidereal year, 365.256 days, with uncanny accuracy. The Maya tracked Venus's cycle to within seconds. The Dogon described the 50-year orbital period of Sirius B. The builders of Nabta Playa in Egypt aligned stone circles to precessional shifts that would only be observable over thousands of years. To even begin these observations, you would need one thing: time. But not just the passage of time, the memory of time. And this is what keeps emerging from the ruins. Not technology, not machinery, but chronology. Our ancestors didn't just measure time, they remembered it, preserved it, honored it, even feared it, because it was the cycle that brought destruction. In Plato's dialogues, Critias speaks of Atlantis, a civilization erased in a single day and night of misfortune. He places its fall 9,000 years before Solon, which puts the date around 11,600 BCE, eerily close to the end of the Younger Dryas, the cataclysm that reshaped Earth. Critics have long dismissed the story as allegory. But why include such a precise date? Why tie it to global floods, earthquakes, and fire? Why does that same approximate date appear across so many disparate traditions? Unless something was remembered. Even the Bible gives us cryptic hints. Genesis describes a pre-flood world of giants and men of renown. The Book of Enoch expands on this, telling of watchers, sky beings, forbidden knowledge, and a flood to wipe away the contamination. Gnostic texts describe a world that forgets, then remembers, then forgets again. Always a return, always a reset. And here is the question that echoes beneath every stone, beneath every myth, beneath every mile of ice. What if we're not at the beginning? What if we're in the middle of a story far older than we can comprehend? In the 1980s, physicist Paul Laviolette proposed a theory known as galactic superwaves, periodic bursts of cosmic radiation emanating from the center of the Milky Way. These waves, he argued, could reach our solar system every 10,000 to 13,000 years, disrupting climate, triggering solar flares, and accelerating extinction events. It was speculative, controversial. Yet ice core data from Greenland shows spikes in beryllium-10 and other isotopes around 12,000 years ago, consistent with such a burst. And if ancient civilizations had observed the sky for thousands of years, as their monuments suggest, they might have noticed the pattern. They might have known the next wave was coming. Would they have tried to escape or prepare? Would they have fled underground, as Hopi legends suggest, or fled north into the mountains, like the Inca origin myth? Or perhaps they fled into time. Because time, like memory, can be coded. Think of the Antikythera mechanism. Not just a tool, but a machine of memory. It predicted eclipses, tracked planetary movement, forecast solar cycles. It didn't guess. It remembered. It turned the sky into a clock. And what if there were larger versions, not made of bronze gears, but of granite pillars, pyramids, circles of standing stones aligned to solstices and equinoxes? If time is cyclical, then space becomes a calendar. And Antarctica? It becomes the vault, not just of knowledge, but of chronology. A frozen metronome. A continent-sized timepiece waiting to be reactivated by alignment. Consider again the Wilkes Land anomaly. If the structure buried beneath the ice encodes stellar positions, if it maps the sky as it appeared in 10,500 BCE, then it is not a ruin. It is a reminder, a beacon set to awaken when the stars return to their appointed place. And if the builders knew that the earth would tilt, that the stars would shift, that the ice would melt, then perhaps they knew we'd be here, that we'd rise again and forget again, unless we learn, unless we read the sky like they did, listen to the stones, chart the returns, because this is the warning laced through every myth, every monument, every flood story. It is not doom, it is rhythm. And the pulse is quickening, the poles are shifting, the magnetosphere is weakening, solar activity is rising, sea levels are not just climbing, they're accelerating. The conditions that ended the last cycle are repeating. And what have we forgotten? We've forgotten how to hear time, how to mark it in resonance and angle, how to build from more than ourselves. But the ancients didn't forget. They built for us, in code, in stone, in memory. And perhaps the final truth, buried beneath miles of ancient ice, is not of who they were, but of what we are still becoming. A civilization on the cusp of remembering that time never left. We did. If you stand at the edge of an Antarctic ice shelf, where the wind shrieks like some ancient thing trying to be remembered, you can feel it, a pressure, not just from the cold or the endless sky, but from something beneath you. A weight that is not ice, not gravity, something else. It is memory, not yours, not mine, but the planet's. This place, more than any other, does not change. It erases, it flattens time, It compacts the past into strata, deeper and denser with every snowfall. Antarctica is the only continent where time is vertical. It stacks. It waits. And now, it is thinning. The Larsen B ice shelf collapsed in 2002. The Thwaites Glacier, the so-called Doomsday Glacier, is crumbling from below. Meltwater rivers flow across the surface of the ice, carving their way into millennia. Lakes vanish overnight. Something is opening, not just physically, but symbolically. The last seal is breaking. So what lies beneath? If the oldest myths speak truth, if a civilization once thrived here before the ice came, then perhaps we are approaching the moment when its presence will no longer be theory, or legend, or silence. Perhaps soon it will be revealed, but not as we expect, because what's buried here may not be a city, or a machine, or a map. It may be a door, not a literal door of wood or stone, but a transition, a threshold in time, a moment encoded into cycles, prepared for with architecture and myth and alignment, waiting for the return. And the key to that door was never lost. It was hidden in plain sight. In 1973, while surveying Antarctica's Queen Maud Land with ground-penetrating radar, Soviet geologists reported strange anomalies in bedrock patterns, perfect hexagonal arrangements, dense material reflecting signals too uniform to be natural. The report was shelved, lost in bureaucracy, or buried deliberately. But rumors persisted. Shapes, echoes, voids. Decades later, NASA's Operation Icebridge, meant to monitor polar ice loss, recorded similar anomalies beneath the same region. Publicly, they were dismissed as basaltic intrusions. Privately, analysis teams noted their symmetry, their alignment to magnetic lines, their echo. Because even sound behaves differently here. Antarctica is so silent that you can hear your blood moving. But under the ice, with the right instruments, comes something else. A resonance. Subharmonic frequencies that don't belong. Vibrations that do not match seismic activity or natural processes. Where do they come from? Some say they're the result of shifting ice, of subterranean lakes moving. Others, those who whisper between institutions, between lines of funding, believe something is waking up. This is the final echo. Every ancient culture knew it. That time is not just circular, but alive. It pulses. It speaks. It remembers us. And if a civilization had once foreseen its own burial, if it had aligned its monuments to the precessional cycle, encoded its knowledge in resonance, and chosen the most unchanging place on Earth to store its legacy, it would not have done so passively. It would have prepared for re-entry. Because survival is not just physical, it is mnemonic. To survive the fall of civilization is not merely to live through it, but to remember enough to rebuild. And perhaps that is what they left beneath the ice. Not ruins, but instructions. And not for them, for us. We are not the first world to rise, and we may not be the last to fall. The flood stories, the cataclysms, the darkened suns, they do not belong to one religion, or one culture, or one corner of Earth. They are universal, because the event that triggered them was universal. The last ending, the last forgetting. And now the cycle spins again. The ice melts, the sky shifts, our machines scan deeper, see clearer, the stars return to their old positions, and the calendar wheels click into place. The monuments, those above sea level and those below, begin to speak again. In shadow, in silence, in code, we are nearing the door. Not a place, a moment, a point on the spiral of history when the past becomes visible again, like a distant shore re-emerging from fog. The question is not what we will find. The question is, what will we remember? Because we are the descendants of survivors. We have their blood. We walk among their markers. We speak fragments of their language. We inherit their fears. And now we inherit their timing. Somewhere in Antarctica, beneath the crushing white, beneath 12,000 years of silence, something remains. Not a myth, not a metaphor, but a structure, a marker, a final act of memory. It is not waiting for us. It is waiting for the stars to return, and they are here. So the door opens, not with a crack or a hinge, but with a recognition, a frequency, a moment when memory meets resonance, when myth becomes geography, when sky becomes ground, and perhaps we will step through, or perhaps we already have.